Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were asking me about, holding the file in the correct position, because if you file too deeply into the gullet, you'll have the wrong angle up here at the point. You should be holding the file about 20% to 25%. So, and that will give you the right amount of hook and exactly the right angle, about 60 degrees top plate cutting angle on here. So top plate cutting angle, don't get confused with top plate. So that's the top plate angle, but because we've also got another angle on the face of that angle, that's a compounded beveled angle. So this angle here on this face is roughly about 60 degrees, give or take. Okay, so we could talk all day, hold the file like this, do that. But they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I thought I would take a few pictures, and this would really explain what you should be looking at when you're filing your teeth. So the first picture that I'd like to display, and we'll put a picture of that up here, is a little bit too much hook. So if you have a look at this picture, there's a little bit too much hook in that. You may get away with that amount of hook in really soft timber, but if that hook is in hard timber, it's liable to get damaged fairly quickly. The next picture is a file. It shows the picture of the file that's too low in the gullet. So you get to have a look at that, what the file looks like, and you'll see that you really don't have 20% or 25% of the file that sticks above the tooth. The file is right on the bottom of the gullet. It should be lifted up higher. Okay, so we've got another picture here of also too much hook in the tooth. You really don't need that amount of hook. You need to reduce that hook, and to reduce that hook, you need to have your file up a bit higher, and you'll reduce it. Another picture here also shows the file that's too low into the tooth. So yeah, there's just another picture of that so you can see that. The fifth picture shows the right amount of hook that you should have. You could have a little bit less than that, but that's not too bad looking at that picture. And the next picture will show you approximately the file is sitting in the correct position about 1/5 above the tooth. So that's not too bad, and that's where you want to keep roughly the file above there. Okay, so the next picture has the right amount of hook, but it says 30 degrees, but 30 degrees is really 60 degrees. Now, I don't want to confuse you. 30 degrees because my measuring apparatus measures from 0 degrees, so it's moved over to 30 degrees. On an Oregon grinder, if 90 degrees is your vertical reference point, then you move over to 60, you've moved 30 degrees. So let me just clear that up. If you see 30 degrees, I'll just remind you that it's 60 degrees. The next one shows the side plate picture. It says 5 degrees, but that's 5 degrees off vertical. 5 degrees off vertical going to the right, the other side, is 85 degrees. So that's pretty spot on, about in the middle, 85 degrees. The next one, file too low into the gullet. The point of the tooth is actually 66.5 degrees, which it's showing 36.5 degrees because, again, we're using 0 degrees reference point. So it's showing that if your file is too low in the gullet, at that point where the file leaves the tooth is 66.5 degrees. And normally that's going to get a little bit too aggressive. If you've got a little bit less hook than you need, or a little bit less hook in general, you're going to go from 60 degrees and fall below 60 degrees, which is just going to get a little bit more aggressive. So you could end up at 55 degrees, in which case that'll be fine with a little bit less hook at 55 degrees won't be an issue. So to improve your filing, after you file the chain, you really do need, or even before you even start to file all the chain, maybe file the first couple of teeth and examine them and make sure that you don't have too much hook going by those pitches. You don't want too much hook. And if we go back to 1991, Still was telling people to hold the file 10% above the top of the tooth, and that generally gave a little bit too much hook. And that just meant that people sometimes would even file too deep into the gullet. Then they revised it and said, hey, you need to hold your file 20% above. But people were still filing too deep into their gullet. So then they're saying now, this is Still, hold your file 25%, a quarter of the file's diameter above there. You'll reduce all that unnecessary hook. And there's two ways of doing that. If you do it by freehand, hopefully you can. If you can't, get yourself one of these file guides. They're not worth much money, and that'll ensure that the file is roughly, I've actually measured it. It's not perfect, but it's not far off it. I felt that maybe the new one's coming out, but this one's a few years old, so it'd be lucky. I reckon it's still below 15% of the file that sticks above the top of the tooth. But in any case, they're meant to be used in a horizontal position, not tilted down. So just bear that in mind. So I hope, just to virtually recap, the pictures that I showed were there to illustrate where your file should be in relation to the correct angle on the side plate of the tooth. That's the best place to look at it, because you can't see it from any other direction. And if you've got too much hook, that will be visibly, to be able to see that visibly by looking at the side. Got a little bit of a little tiny bit of spare chain here. And this was a bit of the chain that I was playing around with. You can see there's a little bit too much hook there. You'll get away with that in softwood, but I prefer to get rid of that hook. And that was probably because the file's a little bit too deep down into the gullet. So yeah, don't file really deep into the gullet, because filing deep into the gullet will give you a bigger hook. Avoid the gullet. Unless you've got really bad ski jumps in there, I wouldn't even touch it. But if you had bad ski jumps on the bottom of the gullet, that means that you can't hand file properly in the first place. In which case, you're probably better off not using a file. You're better off using a file guide like that, and you're probably better off not touching a grinder. If you file correctly, you should never have to touch your gullets on semi-chisel or full chisel. Filing the gullets comes from using square ground chain when the shelf gets a little bit too big, and you file the shelf back a bit so that it doesn't stick out much longer than about 3 millimeters. So that's where get the gullet comes from. It comes from square ground, not round ground. And if you're filing correctly, you never have to worry about the gullet. Just keep your file out of the gullet and make sure that it's above the tooth, between 20% and 25%, and you should be okay. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.